Welcome to the Jamesburg Presbyterian Church. Today is Tuesday, February the 23rd, 2021. Really good to know that there are people out there watching me already, and I know that people will tune in later on. Today we complete the study of the book of Esther. We're doing chapters 9 and 10. Let me just briefly summarize what has happened. We meet in the beginning a king by the name of Ahasuerus. He supposedly is the king of the Assyrian Empire or the Persian Empire. King Ahasuerus, however, appears as a buffoon, a fool, spends most of his time partying and drinking. He is married to a woman whose name is Vashti. She's the queen. However, Vashti is wiser than he is. He asks for her to come to a party where all the men are present, wearing only her crown. She refuses. She is removed as queen. They go out to search for a new queen. They do this by rounding up all the attractive girls in the kingdom, the empire, and they bring them to Susa, which is the capital city. And they go through a one-year beauty treatment, and at the end of that time, they audition for the part of queen. The person who wins the audition, her name is Esther. It turns out that Esther is Jewish. She hides that identity, and she is helped along by her uncle, Mordecai. Just at the end of chapter 2, Mordecai is told about a plot to kill Ahasuerus by two of his eunuchs. Mordecai tells the king's life is saved, and then we launch into chapter 3, in which we meet a new character by the name of Haman. Haman is a ruthless man. He is power hungry, he is full of himself, and he believes that everyone ought to bow down to him. Mordecai refuses, and we suspect that the reason is, and Josephus tells us as much, that he wears an idol around his neck on a chain, and Mordecai doesn't want to bow down to that because it's contrary to the Jewish laws. So Haman develops a hatred for Mordecai, and the hatred is pushed even further, heightened even further, when the king asks Haman how he should honor a man. And what the king is thinking is that he wants to honor Mordecai for saving his life, how he should honor a man who he thinks a great deal of. Haman comes up with a lavish plan for honoring him, because that's who he thinks he is going to be honored. Haman then has to go out and fulfill what the king has decreed in terms of taking care of honoring Mordecai. Meanwhile, Haman has decided to get rid of Mordecai, and not only Mordecai, but all of his people. He issues a decree in the name of the king, with the king's permission, to execute all of the Jewish people living in the empire. They're going to do it on the 13th day of Adar. That is a holiday or a date on which the people of the kingdom are to rise up and kill their Jewish neighbors all over the empire, and to take their property as their own. When this plot is uncovered by Mordecai, he brings it to the attention of Esther, and he tells Esther, in essence, who knows but that you have not been placed in this position at this time for a time like this. Probably the most important punchline of the whole book. Esther calls for a fast. Esther then asks the king, or dresses in her best clothing, appears in the doorway of the palace room. The king calls her in and asks her what she wants. She says she would like to have a dinner with the king and with Haman. Ahasuerus agrees. At the dinner, Ahasuerus asks Esther, what is it that she wants? And she says, well, if you've found favor with me, if it pleases you, I would like to have dinner with you again tomorrow night. Haman has been busy building gallows. The gallows are very, very high, ridiculously high. And The gallows are there for the purpose of executing Mordecai. At the second dinner, she asks for a third dinner. At the third dinner, she reveals that Haman is plotting to kill all of the Jewish people, including her. The king steps out onto the terrace to collect himself and to collect his thoughts. Haman goes to beg mercy from Queen Esther. He falls on her. When the king re-enters the room, it appears as though Haman is assaulting the queen. Ahasuerus has Haman executed on his own gallows. Meanwhile, there is that little matter of the decree that has gone out, which cannot be in any way altered. It cannot be rescinded. It cannot be canceled. It cannot be anything where the people of the empire are to rise up and kill their Jewish neighbors. So at the end of chapter 8, before we launch into our final episode today, Mordecai issues another decree, and it evens the playing field. What it in essence does is it calls for the Jewish people to arm themselves, to gather as militia, to protect themselves, and to kill anyone that comes after them, and allows them to take those persons' property as plunder. So this brings us up to today's episode, and chapter 9, verses 1 through 5 record the first battle. Now, what we can conclude from by the time we read the end of chapter 9 is that Haman's 10 sons have been busy. Now, it doesn't say as much in the book of Esther, but what we can conclude is that Haman's sons want revenge. And so they incite people in the city of Susa. They incite others to rise up against the Jewish people to carry out this decree that Haman has issued, remembering, of course, that Haman's property has been taken from the family, given to Esther, and she has handed this over to Mordecai for him to manage. So on that 13th day of the 12th month, the month of Adar, the edict was to be carried out. And there were apparently 500 Jewish people who rose up against the people, or 500 Gentiles who rose up against the Jewish people. 9 months have passed since these decrees have been issued. It's given people time to do something, to arm themselves, to make some plans, and 500 people in the city of Susa do this. Now, we're told that this happens within the citadel, but we're not told very many details. Is this the army that resides in the citadel that has risen up against the Jewish people? Are these just the friends of Haman? Are these political people? What's going on? And the other question that we should bring to this episode is, why has the king not done anything to quell this uprising, to finish it off, to stop it? The king has done nothing. As a matter of fact, he asks Esther what in fact is going on. How many people have died? Now, in some other areas of the kingdom, there are also people who have risen up against the Jewish people. What the Jewish people have not done, however, though they're allowed to do it, is not only kill those who rise up in this insurrection, but also kill their family members and take their plunder. The book of Esther does not recount any plunder taking or any killing of women and children, just the defense of the Jewish people against those who rose up against them. So we have, on this 13th day of the month of Adar, the 12th month, would be comparable in our calendar to December, the 13th of December. We have these people rising up and this battle going on. When Esther reports to Ahasuerus what has happened, he asks her if there's anything more that she would want from him, and she asks apparently the 10 sons of Haman have also been killed. So the body count in Susa is 510. We are told that the body count in other areas of the empire are much higher. We are told that in one place that it could be as many as 17,500 people. Josephus records a much smaller number, more around the area of 10,000 throughout the whole empire, and it's a vast empire. So apparently there were not that many people that rose up against the Jewish people. Maybe they're inspired because they can get plunder out of this. Anyway, after it's told that the 10 sons of Haman were killed as well, Esther asks that the sons' bodies be hung from the gallows. Clearly what is indicated here is more impalement. The sons are already dead, so now their bodies will be displayed to the population so that people will know what happens when you rise up against the empire, people in the empire. She also asks for one more day, the 14th of Adar, one more day to be armed and defend themselves. The king Ahasuerus grants this, and so there is one more day, the 14th of Adar, in which the Jewish people can defend themselves. And finally, on the 15th day of Adar, the Jewish people are allowed to celebrate. My translation of the book of Esther says that 75,000 people were killed, but and this is probably an exaggerated number. The Septuagint talks about 15,000 people being killed, and as I said, Josephus says that it was more like 10,000. He actually gives the number 10,107. There is no interpretation on such an exact number, although there is 10, 10, and 7. 10, 10, and 7 are all complete numbers. So the takeaway from this is that the people who rose up against the Jewish people were killed. It's important to note that this book was written in a time far from our time today. And the book does not celebrate the death of these Gentiles. The celebration that the Jewish people hold is not to celebrate the carnage. Rather, it is to celebrate that they have been saved. They have been saved from what they thought was going to be extinction. And while God is not specifically mentioned in this book, we can assume that the celebration has to do with their salvation by the hands of God. And it's because Esther has been uniquely positioned so that she could make a difference for her people. The book ends, or chapter 9 ends, with Mordecai writing a letter and saying that because their sorrow was turned to joy, that now they should continue to celebrate this year, remembering it every single year. So that this will be a continuous celebration. He writes this, incidentally, just to the Jewish people, and he writes it in his own name, not the king's name. So what was once going to be a day of extinction, destruction, and total annihilation now becomes a cause to celebrate their salvation. The book of Esther, in some concluding remarks, the book of Esther It recounts a story, and the purpose of the story is to explain the holiday of the festival of Purim. This coming Friday, the Jewish people will celebrate Purim. It's February the 26th this year. Sometimes that holiday is in March. Anyway, the purpose of this book is to explain that holiday, and it even is to explain the length of the holiday, the fact that the time of being armed to defend oneself extended into 2 days, probably maybe an editorial effort to explain later on, after Purim has been established as a one-day celebration, why it has been expanded into a 2-day celebration. The book may have ended earlier, but then these last 2 chapters, chapters 9 and 10, were added just to explain what Purim is all about. Chapter 10 is a kind of happily ever after chapter. We're told that King Ahasuerus now imposes taxes. The taxes were lowered when he married Esther, but we're not told exactly why there's a need to raise taxes at this point, but I guess that's what government does from time to time. It also says that many people respected Mordecai because of the power that he had acquired, and we see in this book a young girl. She starts off as a young girl who is brought to a harem. Everything is against what she wants, her will. And then what happens is, over a period of time, she rises up to meet the requirements and even more the requirements of her job as queen, and she exceeds it. She becomes essentially the person in charge of the Persian Empire. Even though she's a fictitious character, we should note that she becomes a role model for women today. She took advantage of the situation. She took advantage of the circumstances she was in and learned how to use them for the good of all people. And that's the purpose of government. If we were to do a takeaway from this book, the purpose of government is to work for the good of all people, not just some, but all people. So this is the book of Esther. We did it in 7 weeks. We began on January the 12th. Today is February the 23rd. And it's one of my favorite books. Next week, I'd like to start with another one of my favorite books. It's from the Apocrypha. It's the book of Tobit. There are 2 wonderful stories sewn together into the book of Tobit. It's a story about how God answers prayer. And God answers prayer in sometimes ways we cannot possibly predict. It's a book about retributive justice. If you do good, you get good. If you do bad, you get bad. We can talk about what the theological principles are that are involved in retributive justice. But it's a great book, and 2 out of the book there are those 2 stories sewn together that really are wonderful stories that could stand independently of each other. Anyway, we're going to start that next week. I'll have a better plan next week of how many weeks where it'll take. I do not want this to extend. It's 14 chapters. We're not going to do a chapter a week. We're going to pick up the pace and go much faster than that. So maybe another 7-week study, but it's a great book. It's in the Apocrypha. You probably have not read it before. You may not have even heard of it before, but I think we'll enjoy the story. There will be a devotional tomorrow. I hope you'll all tune in for that. And we will be live streaming next Sunday. Incidentally, next Sunday is our congregational meeting. For those of you who are members of the church and live close by, if you could come to church this coming Sunday, we do need your presence for a quorum. Thank you very much. See you soon. Stay safe.